Welcome back. I hope you had a good break. So let's take a few minutes to go back into the quiet, finding a comfortable position to sit in. Don't worry, I won't put you to sleep. Or if you do fall asleep, that's fine too. But this should be refreshing rather than enervating. And we will once again begin and end with a poem, or in this case, a short prose passage from Santa Teresa de Avila. I have to admit, Teresa writes, today I was delighting with my beloved in prayer, and I grew very bold. Why isn't it enough for you, my Lord, I complained, to keep me bound to this miserable life? For love of you, I endure all this and resign myself to living in a place where everything hinders me from enjoying you. Here, I have to eat and sleep and conduct business and carry on conversations with everyone. It torments me, my Lord, but I suffer it all for love of you. In the few moments I have left over to enjoy your presence, how could you hide yourself from me, my beloved? Is this compatible with your compassion? How can your love for me allow this? Do not put up with this separation a moment longer, my beloved. I beg you to see how much you are hurting the one who loves you so much. It occurred to me to say many other things to my beloved, knowing perfectly well how merciful he has been to me. But sometimes I become so crazy with love that I don't know what I'm saying. With the full energy of my mind, I launch these complaints against my Lord, and he puts up with it all. Praise be to such a great King. So let's just sit for a few minutes, letting those words reverberate. Go ahead and make your demands on your beloved in the quiet of your own interior castle. Tell her, tell him exactly what you want. Mean it. Reach out. Stamp your foot. And just breathe. Breathing is not incompatible with demanding. His Majesty soon followed through on his promise to make it abundantly clear to me that my visions came from him. He began to increase my love for God to such a degree that I didn't know where it came from or how to obtain it. This love was supernatural. I was dying with desire to see God. I didn't know where to seek the life I was longing for except through death. Such powerful impulses of love coursed through me that I didn't know what to do with myself. Nothing satisfied me. I couldn't stand to be with myself. It truly seemed like my soul was being torn away from me. O Lord, you supreme trickster, what subtle artfulness you use to do your work in this slave of yours. You hide yourself from me and afflict me with your love. You deliver such a delicious death that my soul would never dream of trying to avoid it. Let's do the chant we learned this morning for Shabbat, Shalom Aleichem, and call the angels to be with us this afternoon. Shalom Aleichem, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Aleichem, 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 Shalom Aleichem, Shalom. One more time, full voice, call the angels. Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem, Shalom, Shalom. We'll have the Shalom Band back in about an hour. Think we should take it on the road? Oh, I am on the road. Thank you, guys. So one time, Teresa of Avila had been living in the convent of the Encarnacion. How many of you have been to Avila? Oh, several of you. So you know the St. Joseph's convent was the first discalced, barefoot reform convent that she founded, and the Incarnation was the one that she was in before that for a long time. And she had become the prioress of the convent, and so she was the boss, and she was in charge, which is just the way she liked it. I think Teresa was an 8 on the Enneagram, for those of you who are familiar. So she was very comfortable being bossy, and she was that day in charge of overseeing a feast day celebration. I think it was the feast of St. Joseph, to whom she was deeply devoted because she felt that Joseph had healed her when she was dying. I don't know if you know the story of Teresa of Avila as a very young woman when she first entered the convent, which was the last thing anybody ever expected Teresa of Avila to do. She didn't seem to have a religious bone in her body. As a teenager, she was a wild one. Does anyone know any teenagers like that? Was anyone a teenager like that? So her mother died when she was 12, and she just was out of control, and her father adored her, so he just let her get away with murder. Whatever that was, we don't really know, but finally he was compelled to send her away, get ye to a nunnery, and he sent her to an Augustinian convent when she was 16 because she did something, we don't know what. I've often wondered. There are several people who reveal themselves to me in talks and gatherings I give and let me know that they're the reincarnation of St. Teresa of Avila. So I always ask them, what did you do to get yourself sent away? Nobody's had an answer for me. They always seem a little taken aback by the question, but don't you want to know? So we don't know. I mean, did she lose her virginity? Did she hold hands with somebody? We don't know. Anyway, she went off to the convent and to get her out of trouble until the scandal, because it was a scandal in her neighborhood in Avila, till it passed, and she kind of fell in love with religious life in the convent. And when she came back, she astonished her father by asking his permission to enter the convent as a nun. And he tried desperately to talk her out of it, and she wouldn't hear of it. She entered, but she became very ill. And I don't know, tell me what you think later. I think, not right now, that it was because she was so conflicted about religious life. She had this deep inner yearning for God, but she really wasn't suited for the kind of pious religious life of the convent. And did any of you see that new, I think it's a Netflix series on Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, the 18th century, I think it was 17th even, nun from Mexico? Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. How many people know about Sor Juana? Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. This is your homework. Investigate, you do. Okay. Sor Juana she was very much a feminist nun and engaged in more political and social commentary, I would say, than religious reflection. But she was in Inquisition Mexico, because of course the Inquisition followed the Jews primarily to the so-called New World and continued their persecutions here. And so it's I think it's like an 8-part series on Sor Juana, well worth seeing. But anyway, Teresa of Avila wasn't really a monastic type. Certainly wasn't a religious woman in that conventional sense. But one also wonders if she might have been partially motivated to enter the convent not only for love of God and longing for God, but because the only other option for her was what? marriage and children. Her mother died. I think Teresa saw her die. She certainly was in the house when her mother was 33 in childbirth with her 9th child. So that couldn't have looked like a really attractive path. So yeah, these were the choices, and she did, as a little girl, have a deeply religious inclination. Like, she would set up little convents and monasteries made of stones and twigs in her backyard, and pretend that she was nun and make all of her friends play nun with her. So she did have those inclinations. She talks about in the book of my life early on, her life story, which I also had the great privilege of translating. She talks about this experience she had as a little girl where she would repeat the word forever. She heard about this word in church, that you be in heaven with Jesus forever. And she was wondering about what forever means. And she began to repeat it to herself. So those of you who have studied or practiced yoga in the Eastern traditions know about mantra. There's something very powerful about the repetition of a word. It could be any word, really, but certain words that are invested with sacred energy, even more so. So Teresa repeated to herself as a little girl this word forever, forever, forever. I imagine her turning in slow circles in her room, forever, forever. And she spun herself into an undifferentiated, non-dual space where her little individual self, such that it was at that age, dissolved. And that was her first mystical experience. I mean, I'm slightly overlaying my own interpretation here, but not much. I'm a translator. I can do that a little bit. And I don't think it's a big stretch to say that was her first mystical experience. I think she basically was saying that it was. But then years went by, and she, became a teenager, and all of that was far behind her. But then she entered the convent, and at this point, she just spent 20 years working her way up the ranks to become the boss of the convent, to become the abbess in charge of everything. Bless you. So here we are this day. She's preparing for this feast. All the convents were, they had to share resources because nobody had very much. And so they had borrowed from the poor Clares down the road in Avila a statue of Christ being scourged at the pillar for this event, this holy event that day. And someone had placed the statue in the hallway of the convent, and they were getting ready. They were setting up, and Teresa was bustling through, going about her business, and she saw the statue, and it wasn't where it was supposed to be, so she was kind of annoyed. And she went to pick it up to take it where it was supposed to be, and as she leaned down to reach for this statue, Christ's face caught her eye, and suddenly their gazes were kind of connected. She was looking into the eyes of the statue, and it was no longer an inert piece of stone or wood or whatever it was. It was Christ gazing into her eyes. And his face, his gaze radiated such incredible compassion and also pain. Like love and pain, all in the same beautiful eyes. She could see his suffering because there he was at the pillar being whipped. But she saw his unconditional love for her, very personal love. And as she looked into his eyes and he looked into hers, her heart broke and broke open. Now, Teresa of Avila had not really had a spiritual feeling, she says, for 20 years at this point. She had become very good at religious life. She was a good nun against all odds. Nobody expected that she would ever behave so well. The way that she expressed her rebellion was in the parlor, the convent parlor on Sundays, they would receive visitors. And she loved to be the life of the party. You know, she was the most charming and witty, and she would expound on spiritual topics, but also make jokes and flirt, and she just had everybody enthralled with her, which she secretly saw as a vice, but this was kind of how she managed to rebel against the strictures of religious life and have a good time. But she hadn't really felt the presence of the divine very much during that time. And so this day, when she looks into Christ's eyes and her heart breaks, she says it's like the dam burst inside her and the floodgates opened and she began to weep. She hadn't really cried all this time either. I mean, remember, she'd experienced this traumatic loss of her beloved mother as a young girl, but she had kind of armored herself and prided herself on being unemotional and steely and strong, and would tease the younger girls who would cry at the drop of a hat, especially in prayer. She thought that was silly. But here she was, weeping. And in fact, the next thing she knew, she was on the floor, fully prostrate at his feet. And she said, "Beloved, don't ever let me stop loving you like I'm loving you right now. This love that I feel for you, this is all I ever wanted. Do not take it from me. In fact, beloved, I am not going to move from this floor until you promise me that I will always love you this much." I call this Teresa's immovable spot. You know the story of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, when he sat beneath the Bodhi tree? He sat and said, "I am not moving from this spot until I break free, until I am liberated, until I understand the nature of reality." And he awakened 49 days later as the Buddha, as the awakened one. So that was Teresa. If you don't mind my comparing her to Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, that was her they call it her second conversion, and she emerged from that place transformed with love, broken open by love, and she never did again forget how much she loved God. The end. So this longing business, someone approached me at break, and we'll talk about this in the Q&R at the very end, but if you want to bring it up. But basically, someone said, well, if you're yearning and longing, doesn't that mean you're not being present with what is? Like the power of now and all that? So here's my response to that, and Teresa of Avila for me models it. To be a contemplative means to be fully available to the present moment. Would everyone agree that that's kind of the hallmark of contemplative life, is to be fully present with what is? Yes, to sit in silence on a regular basis as a spiritual practice, great. That helps grow a contemplative life. And then, and more importantly perhaps, to carry that ability to show up fully for the present moment into your life. Power of now, yes, be here now, Ram Dass. Power of now, Eckhart Tolle. Every contemplative ever in any tradition. Let's be present with what is so that we may be available to the presence of the sacred that is breaking in everywhere, always. Is that inconsistent with disarming our hearts and making ourselves available to the innate longing of our souls for union with love? I don't think that, not only do I not think that they're inconsistent or that longing precludes contemplative presence, but in fact, to be a true contemplative is to be a mystic, and to be a mystic is to be someone who is in love with love itself, and to be fully available to the beloved everywhere, always. If we don't allow ourselves to touch into that vulnerable, naked, empty space, that empty cup of the heart, then we may miss the opportunity for a direct encounter with the mystery itself, the mystery of love. When you see the bunny leading the deer through the sunset, for instance, and you stop and pay attention, and your heart breaks open, is there not an element of sweet anguish in that same appreciation? Isn't there underlying all of our encounters with the sacred a kind of exquisite pain as well as sweetness, as well as gratification? Maybe it's just me because I'm a 4. I don't know. Is it anyone else? Please raise your hands if those moments of sweetness also break your heart. Okay. There, got that question answered so far. At 3:45, we'll skip that one. I hope that helps for the person who was wondering about reconciling this being present with what is with cultivating holy longing. They are not only compatible, but I think importantly intertwined. And I think Teresa of Avila models that beautifully. Okay, how about some writing? Ready? So one more time, we'll go over the guidelines. When I give you the prompt, you're going to write for, it's going to be just about 10 minutes, maybe 8. I'll ring the bell to start and ring the bell to stop. And you're going to endeavor to not censor yourself, even though this time you know you're going to be reading to each other. And you keep your hand moving. Try to stay specific and grounded in sensory detail. No worries about punctuation, spelling, grammar, handwriting. When you start to approach the jugular, don't avoid it. Go for it. That's about it. And when we're finished, I'm just going to tell you now to just go ahead and cluster into your triads. Take your time. I'm not going to ring the bell for each person. I'm sorry about that confusion earlier. For each person to go on to the next person, because I don't know how long each piece is. So you're going to self-regulate the timing there. Each person will read. The other 2 people will offer the fullness of your attention. Thank the person. Pause. Go to the next person. And if at the end of all 3 people reading at your own pace, you'd like to chat a little, that's totally fine, and I'll be scanning to see if I can tell when you're finished reading and bring you back. Any questions about the method before we go forth? Okay. So the prompt is, the last time I saw you. The last time I saw you. wait just a moment before you get into your triads, please. So you're welcome to get in the same groups that you were in this morning or in a new group as you wish. I know it's kind of hard to do this part, to like get it, especially if you're an introvert, getting into a group and asking people if you can be in their group is it can be really daunting. So we're all friends here now, I hope. We're community, and I'm hoping that will be easeful for you. I just want to offer a couple of guidelines for the reading part today, this afternoon. So as you can see, this is kind of part 2 from this morning. You may not have been writing about the same being the first time I saw you and the last time I saw you. You may be writing about the same person or entity. I didn't want to direct that and let that arise for you. But as you may have noticed, there's a difference in quality emotionally to the writing this afternoon. And this is a prompt that sometimes will elicit a deeper sense of loss. And for many people, not always, but for many of us. And so as we read to each other this afternoon, let's just hold each other with even more tenderness and reverence as we each share the last time I saw you. And if someone's crying, you don't have to do anything except love them and hold presence for them and bear witness. If they want to be touched, then you can ask, or they can ask for it. But when I did grief counseling training about 10 years ago, one of the things they taught us is when you're doing grief counseling, don't hand someone a tissue when they start crying. Why? Because it makes them feel like they have to stop. That's their signal that they're not allowed to cry anymore because it's making me uncomfortable. And so if someone needs a tissue, then of course give them a tissue, but you don't have to withhold it. I've been in groups where I've told that and people said, no, you can't give her a tissue. No, it's not like you'll get arrested if you give someone a tissue, but just be aware that whatever someone's going through is perfectly all right. And just support each other, be present for each other, but bearing witness is the greatest gift sometimes that we can give to someone in their pain. They don't need to be fixed. They don't want to be fixed. There's nothing broken just because they're crying. And if you're the one who's feeling emotional and maybe feeling like weeping or be crying, then please don't apologize. I mean, I gave you a really painful prompt. You have every reason to be crying. And if you can't read, then just take your time. When you're ready and you're able to speak again, then you just keep going. Pause, cry, speak, read. Okay? And none of this is set in stone. Like, I've been in groups with people who have said, could you read it? And hand their reading to someone else. And then, if you're like me and were a high school English teacher for years, you can probably read it. Otherwise, it could be really hard to read somebody else's writing. You can't even read our own writing sometimes in these writing practices. So I think that's all the guidelines I need to give you for now. Just holding sacred space for each other. Take your time, and go ahead and get into your groups. I'll ring the bell when I think it's time to come back. Is anyone not okay? All right. I won't leave you bleeding this afternoon at 4:05, I promise. Well, I guess I can't promise, but I'm gonna try. And you'll let one of us know if you feel like you're carrying more than you can carry right now in your hearts, and we'll help you. But the purpose of this exercise, thank you, Kevin, is to find that place inside of us where loss and longing for the divine may not be, but may be somehow entwined. And when we make ourselves fully available to our hearts as they are, with all they carry, that we may, it's like this is contemplative practice. Being present for what is opens this spaciousness to grace. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible. And so for me, personally, Mirabai, there has always been an interconnection between loss and longing. And when we tell our story, whatever our story may be, if we tell it authentically and truly and uncensored and unfiltered to the extent that we can, carrying around the psychological baggage that we're built to carry, those filters are there. But if we can, as radically and fearlessly as possible, tell the truth about our lives, then we're able to be present for the transformational potential in our own personal story, which connects us, guess what, with everyone, with the whole of the human condition. In fact, to end, before the break that is, maybe I'll read you a little something that I share in my memoir about that caravan of no despair, just a couple of paragraphs. They surrounded me like a peasant militia trying to defend a village from an imperialist army. But no matter how valiantly my loved ones fought to protect me against the violence of my loss, they could not shield me from the inevitable. What I needed, in fact, was a moment alone so that I could begin to take in and integrate with what had happened. A few days after Jenny's death, I convinced everyone that I would be fine on my own for a little while, and I finally had an hour to myself. I lay down on the floor and took up the work of grieving. I watched as a wall of pain rose above me, and I understood that I was powerless to get out of its way. So I surrendered and allowed it to wash over me like a tidal wave. I was willing to be obliterated. I had nothing to lose. Even as I rocked on my knees, howling, I detected a soft breathing beyond the roaring. I leaned in, I listened. It was the murmuring of 10 million mothers, backward and forward in time, and right now, who had also lost children. They were lifting me, holding me. They had woven a net of their broken hearts, and they were keeping me safe there. I realized that one day I would take my rightful place as a link in this web, and I would hold my sister mothers when their children died. For now, my only task was to grieve and be cradled in their love. So I called that little vision, because that's what it was, the net of mothers. And it was in my most broken space that I discovered that I was not alone at all. I was fully participating in the human condition. And that mothers for millions of years behind me, and possibly another 150 depending on what Trump does ahead of me, mothers would also be bearing the losses of their children. And right now, because Jenny died 6 weeks after 9/11, so the whole world was grieving in many ways, and we were going to war in the Middle East again. I think we were just about to bomb Iraq. We had finished with Afghanistan, right? I don't remember the timing because I was grieving, but the world was at war. And I knew that mothers everywhere were losing children right at that very moment that I was grieving the death of my daughter. And it placed me in the center of the human condition, where not only was I participating, but I was welcomed. Like, welcome, we'll hold you. Your turn will come, and you'll hold others, because there's only one of us anyway. And so our personal losses, when we are authentically present and tell them truly, are our doorway to connecting with all beings, to not reaching out to connect with them as some kind of artificial effort, but it's actually a remembering of what already is, a recognition of our essential interconnectedness. And because of the power of our loss, we are stripped of our ordinary impediments to resting in that interconnectedness, if we're willing to show up for it. And our culture will tell us, get away from that precipice right now. You're going to fall in and hurt yourself. And I'm inviting us to dive in. You know that Zen story about the person who's running from the tiger, and the tiger is pursuing her, and she's at the edge of the cliff, and there's nowhere to go but over, and then she looks down, and there's another tiger at the bottom. And so she sees that there's a vine, and she grabs hold of the vine, and she's dangling with one hungry, snarling tiger above her and another one below her. And she looks up, and there are little ants, and they're nibbling on the vine, and it's about to break. And then she notices that there's a perfectly ripe strawberry right beside her. And she plucks the berry and she eats it, and it's the sweetest thing she's ever tasted. And so yes, we're going to fall to our death, and according to people like John of the Cross and Rumi and Mirabai and some of these other mad ones for God, annihilation is actually the point. Die before you die, and everything will be incredibly sweet if you are present for the moment exactly as it is. I'm not saying there aren't tigers down there and up there. There are. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. So we're going to do a little chant now. Some of you getting tired, perhaps? Who's tired? Go ahead. Actually, I'm not tired, but that's because I'm up here. There's different kind of energy. But it's understandable if you'd be tired, especially after that last exercise and some of what that might have stirred in you. So we're coming in on the home stretch. And we're going to enter this last section of our time together with a chant. So the words are a combination of a Christian hymn and a Sufi zikr from the Islamic tradition. So the words in English from the Christian hymn, some of you may be familiar with, are, "All I ask of you is forever to remember me as loving you." Does that sound familiar to anyone? All I ask of you is forever to remember me as loving you. And the second part of this chant, we're going to do it as a chant, call and response, is the Arabic words, Ishkala mabud lela. Ishkala mabud lela, which means God is love, lover, and beloved. And this comes from the great American Sufi teacher, Pir Vilayat Khan. Anybody familiar with Pir Vilayat Khan and Hazrat Inayat Khan? So Hazrat Inayat Khan's son was Pir Vilayat Khan, and Pir's son is Pir Vilayat Khan's son is Pir Zia Khan, who's the head of the Abode, the Sufi center in upstate New York. And Pir Zia, who's in his late 40s, I think, at the most, maybe mid 40s, is one of the major spiritual leaders on the planet right now, who's openly, actively advocating for climate justice, and is a major climate activist. Pir Zia Anayat Khan, you can look him up. Anyway, this comes from that lineage. Ishkala Mabud Lela, God is love, lover, and beloved. And so we're going to do this together. And while Katie and Ed come up here with me, the Shalom Band, I'd like you to just practice the words. Ishkala Mabud Lela. Ishk is I-S-H-K. It means love. Ishk, love in Arabic. Ishk Allah Mabud Lela. So it's Mabud Lela. Ishkala Mabud Lela. Ishkala Mabud Lela. And it's just great timing. I have a frog in my throat. You're going to have to help me carry this. In fact, let's not even do call and response. We'll just sing it as long as we feel like singing it.
Okay. 8 hours later.
Yeah, 8 hours later. Thank you, Katie and Ed. So just sink into the reverberations of that message. Ishkalama Budlela. God is love, lover, and beloved. Or as someone so beautifully shared with me at the break, the theology of not yet and right now in the same space. Longing and union. Not yet and right now. Full presence and deep, passionate yearning. All at the same time. Our hearts are big enough to contain the paradox of the mystical path. Especially when they're broken, then they're bigger. Have you noticed that? Who's familiar with Julian of Norwich? Raise your hand. Just about everybody. Anybody not familiar with Julian of Norwich? Wow, okay. Really hardly anybody's not. Okay, a little bit. A couple of people. So Julian was, for those of you who don't know, was a medieval English mystic, and the only other person besides John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila that I've translated, because I kind of spoke the language. It was Middle English, though, and John and Teresa spoke early Renaissance Spanish, which is not modern Castilian Spanish, so that was also a challenge to translate. Julian spoke medieval Spanish. She was the first woman to write in English, in the vernacular, and definitely wasn't supposed to be writing about theology. Interestingly, where I live in northern New Mexico, in the whole kind of Rio Grande corridor there, northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, this was a place where many people, where the first conquistadores came to North America, and many of them were actually conversos. They were Jews who were fleeing the Inquisition and ended up in the Americas and actually went underground with their Judaism and even mostly forgot. And they call themselves crypto-Jews now. Probably some of you are familiar with this phenomenon. A lot of Hispanic Catholics who have been in the U.S. for centuries, like the people in northern New Mexico, the Spanish people have been there since the 1500s. They are finding that they are crypto-Jews, that their families were secretly practicing Judaism for centuries and sort of lost a sense of what they were doing, but they still continued the rituals. And there are Stars of David in many of the cemeteries. The grandmothers light the candles on Friday night, don't really know why, and there are a lot of names and a lot of Jewish customs have managed to incorporate themselves in with the Spanish Catholic customs. It's a very rich religious community in northern New Mexico, and they speak, the Spanish that they speak is 16th century Spanish. It's the same as the Spanish that I translated from John and Teresa. So when I was doing my original translations, I was able to consult with especially some of the older people who still speak almost entirely Spanish, and they were completely familiar with both the syntax and the grammar of 16th century Spanish, which is different. But Julian wrote in Middle English, and I translated her into a contemporary, I hope, accessible English. So I'd like to this last part of our time together, and we'll end with a substantial question period for you to ask questions if you wish. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Julian now. And if you're sleepy, I apologize. Just go ahead and snooze if you need to. I'm going to read to you just a page from my introduction to this translation of Revelations of Divine Love, or the Showings of Julian of Norwich. And then I'm going to read you a little bit of Julian's words in translation. But just quickly, the story is that when Julian was in her 30s, 33 and a half to be exact, because she tells us, it's one of the only things she tells us about herself. In fact, by the way, Julian isn't even her name. We don't know what her name is. She was anonymous. But the reason people call her Julian of Norwich is that she, in her late 30s, early 40s, attached herself to the Church of St. Julian in Norwich, England. She had an anchorage built, which was a cell that was attached to the church. How many of you been to Norwich and seen the anchorage? Yeah. And she cloistered herself inside of this cell for the rest of her life, and to engage in a life of prayer and contemplation as a lay religious person. But she wasn't entirely cloistered. You probably can't see the cover of this book. It's a beautiful painting, and I forgot who it's by. Authors, don't usually get to pick the covers of your books. I never have been able to. Well, yeah. The publisher does. So the publisher found this beautiful painting of Julian in her anchorage, but as you can possibly see, there's a window. And through that window, you see lots of people. And these are the people of Norwich. Norwich was a busy little city, still is. And through the window, Julian could see the people of Norwich, and they could come to the window and connect with her, which they did. They came to her for spiritual counsel, and which often meant very ordinary counsel. I don't know what to do. My son is 23 and he's not married yet. Whatever it might have been. From the sublime to the ridiculous, Julian would counsel people, and they would bring her food. You might see that there's some kind of food thing on the shelf. I always thought it was bread. It's bees. They're beehives. Julian was a beekeeper. And she also had a little doorway into a courtyard where she grew herbs and a few vegetables and mostly flowers. And then, in addition to the window that went out onto the street where she could freely interact with the people and did every day, there was another window into the sanctuary where she could attend Mass and receive communion. So, when Julian was 33 and a half, she almost died. She had a near-death experience. And in that near-death experience had a vision, actually 17 visions of Christ, who revealed himself to her primarily in the midst of his passion. And the passion of Christ, as revealed to Julian by him, was not tragic and sad. I mean, it was. It was bloody and painful and awful, and it was something else too. It was something beautiful and tender. And mostly the Christ that revealed himself to Julian was, she uses words like friendly and homey and kind. And she developed this intimate relationship with Christ crucified. And in the end, Christ revealed himself to be herself, as we spoke about last night, as the second person of the Trinity. So it was Father, Mother, and Holy Spirit, because only a mother would do what Christ did, break herself open and pour herself out for the love of her children. So that's enough of an introduction there. Well, I guess the only other thing about Julian to know is that she didn't believe in sin. Sin was what she called no thing. It didn't have any substance, she says. It was an absence rather than a thing in itself. Now, you would think Julian would have gotten in trouble for being the first woman to write in English, a woman writing about theology, a woman who spoke about God in the feminine, and a woman who says there's no such thing as sin. So how did she get away with this? Well, she hid her manuscript under her bed. She didn't show it to anyone in her lifetime. But one young sister, a nun, knew that Julian was writing, and after her death, she kept it safe. And it was kept so safe that it was undiscovered for centuries. Yeah, it was only in the 19th century that the showings of Julian of Norwich were rediscovered and finally made available. And only in the middle part of the 20th century was she even really made known. And she's still not canonized. She's Dame Julian, Lady Julian, not Saint Julian, although for many people she's a saint. Okay, so that's enough background, and I'm going to read to you a page from my introduction and then about a page from her. I like to know where I'm going and what people are going to be doing to me. I don't know about you, but that's the program. So this is my attempt to, in one page, summarize Julian of Norwich, and really. You have been to the threshold of death and felt the breath of eternity on your eyelids. Sorry, one more thing. So she had this near-death experience. She didn't die, but it seemed like absolutely inevitable that she was going to. So much so that the priest was called to give her last rites. And that's when she had the vision, because the priest came in and he held a crucifix over her face, and he said, you need to look at this as you're dying, and you will go straight to heaven. And so she looked at the crucifix, and it's sort of like Teresa's experience in the corridor of the monastery. Christ came alive for her, and she returned because she had work to do, and she did that work. And the thing about Julian is that, and the way it connects with grief and transformation, is that Julian lived through 3 rounds, not in her own body, but in her community, of the plague, of the Black Death, during which at least 50% of the people in her community died. So, hello, Julian must have lost many people she loved. Quite possibly a husband and children, although because she never writes about her life, we don't know. The only person she mentions is her mother, who was with her as she was dying and didn't die. But it seems pretty likely that a woman in her 30s would have been married and had children by then, and everybody in her life was gone. Okay, I think that's relevant. You have been to the threshold of death and felt the breath of eternity on your eyelids. You don't need the appointed intermediaries to tell you about the Holy One. You have had a direct encounter, and it has changed you. When they speak about God's will and tell you exactly how to interpret it, you stifle a chuckle and try to look pious. You have gone riding wild horses with the Holy One along a rocky seashore under the full moon. They warn you about impure thoughts, but the God you love is an unconditionally loving mother who squeezes your cheeks, looks into your eyes, and tells you that you are the most adorable creature she ever created. Ever since that troublemaker Eve handed that gullible Adam the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they say, human beings have been continuously messing up and suffering the consequences. But in the depths of your darkest despair, your beloved calls to you. Look, he says, and opens the fathomless, beautiful wound of his heart so that you can peer inside. All creation is nestled there, bathed in beauty. Do you see any sin here, he asks? Do you detect a shred of retribution? You do not. All you perceive from horizon to endless horizon is love. As far as your eye can see, there stretches a line of joyous children being welcomed home. The God you have met does not want your self-recrimination. You have already paid the price for your stumbling. You have endured the sorrow and weariness ignorance brings. Your God would never punish you for being a human being. This life itself is your penance, she reminds you. But it is also more than that. It is a crucible for transformation. Every trial, each loss is an opportunity for you to meet suffering with love and make of it an offering, a prayer. The minute you lift your pain like a candle, the darkness vanishes and mercy comes rushing in to heal you. So that was drawing from all of Julian's teachings in this book. I didn't make it up. I mean, I made up that particular prose language, but it's all in here. So let me read you just a couple of passages of Julian to kind of wrap up. How are you doing? Do you need to stretch? You want to stand up and stretch a little? Anyone feeling that need? No, yes? All right, those who would like to, please just breathe in and reach up if you choose to. And breathe out and very gently roll down and just hang. Sway a little. And breathe in and reach up. And breathe out and very, very gently roll down. Let your head go. One last time, breathing in, reaching up. Breathing out, letting it all go. Thank you. Our beloved reminded me of the longing I had for him before, and I realized that nothing stood in my way except sin, which is the thing that stands in everyone's way. It seemed to me that if there were no such thing as sin, we would be as pure as our Lord created us, reflecting his likeness. And so, like a fool, I used to wonder about this. Why wouldn't God, in his omniscience, have prevented sin when he created us? If he had left sin out of creation, it seemed to me all would be well. I know I should have abandoned this disturbing line of thought, but I couldn't seem to help myself. I grieved and lamented this beyond all reason and discretion. But in this showing, Jesus gave me all that I needed. Sin is inevitable, he said, yet all will be well, and all will be well. And every kind of thing shall be well. So she says that in this naked word sin, my beloved brought to mind a general sense of all that is not good. And she goes on to explain that sin is the absence of loving kindness, basically. And later in that chapter, she says that she looks, because Christ is giving her all these teachings, these direct teachings. She says, I always tried to line them up with the teachings of Holy Mother Church, but if they deviated, which she says they rarely did, but when occasionally the teachings that Christ gave her directly would be different than the teachings of Holy Church, guess what she chose? The direct transmission. And so she's asking him, well, what about sin? It just seems like if there was no sin, that everything would be fine, all would be well. So what is this? And teach me about sin, she said. But the truth is, I did not see any sin, because she was looking. The truth is, I did not see any sin. I believe that sin has no substance, not a particle of being, and cannot be detected at all except by the pain it causes. And so she goes on to say for much of the book, the retribution, punishment, all of that is pointless. We suffer when we miss the mark. There's no reason to be punished by God. Plus, she says again and again, because she knows, there is no wrath in God. No wrath anywhere. There is only unconditional love. That doesn't mean we don't go through stuff. In fact, there's one point where she says, I heard him say, I shall utterly shatter you. I will empty you of your vain inclinations and bitter pride. After that, I will gather you up and infuse you with humility and gentleness. I will make you pure and holy. I shall won you to myself. O-N-E, won you. Julian's the one who coined that beautiful term, wonning. You can't translate that. I mean, I could call it uniting, joining, but no, it's wonning. That's a purely Julian of Norwich term. God wants to won us with himself. We long to be wonned with God, wonned as a verb. Then I saw that every impulse of loving compassion we have toward our fellow human beings is the Christ in us. And every kind of humiliation he suffered in his passion is revealed in our compassion. As far as I dared, she goes on to say later, a couple chapters later, I wish to be shown a fuller understanding of hell and purgatory. It was never my intention to challenge the teachings of our faith in any way. I am in full agreement with Holy Church about the purpose of hell and purgatory. I simply wanted, for the sake of learning, to comprehend every aspect of our faith's teachings, including this one, which I did not really understand. In this way, I hoped I could better honor God and improve my life. Yet, in spite of this desire, I learned nothing whatsoever about hell and purgatory. Okay. No wrath, no blame, only love. And I'm just going to read a couple of sentences about God, the Mother, here. This book is well worth reading or rereading. So get a chance. Julian of Norwich, The Showings. I realize that the second person is really our mother. This beloved being works with us as a parent here on earth. We were created with a twofold soul, sensual and spiritual. Who does that sound like? This was centuries before John of the Cross. Our spiritual essence is with God the Father. Our sensual nature lies with the second person of the Trinity, God the Mother. So sensual and spiritual, transcendent, immanent. So our sensual nature lies with the second person of the Trinity, God the Mother, in whom we are rooted by virtue of our creation. In taking on our flesh, the second person became our Mother of mercy. Our Mother keeps all our parts together and works on us in various ways. We profit and grow in Christ the Mother. Through her mercy, she restores and redeems us. Through his passion, his dying, and his resurrecting, he makes us one with his own essence. And so the Mother acts with mercy toward all her loving children. Grace, which belongs to the Holy Spirit, joins with mercy, who bestows great gifts on us to reward us for our hard labor and abiding faith. This act of giving is offered freely with courtesy and grace, surpassing what any creature deserves. And so, we have our being in our Father, Almighty God. We have our restoration and our redeeming in our Mother of Mercy, in whom all our attributes are reconciled and transformed into the perfect human being. And we are completed and made whole through the gifts of grace of the Holy Spirit. Our essence lies in our Father, God all-power. Our essence lies in our Mother, God all wisdom. Our essence lies in our Master, the Holy Spirit, God all goodness. Our essence dwells in totality within each person of the Trinity, which is one God. Again, pretty good for a Jewish, Sufi, Buddhist, Hindu, huh? I get it. I get this Trinity stuff, you guys. Especially the way Julian Norwich and Father Richard Rohr describe it. It's a relationship of love. That makes sense to me. Okay, so just a couple more things from Julian. This beautiful word mother is so sweet and kind in itself that it cannot be attributed to anyone but God. Only He who is our true mother and source of life may rightfully be called by this name. Okay. Let's skip ahead to the end. Don't tell anyone how it ends. This is my favorite part, and nobody told me about this. You know, when I was a teenager, maybe you have your own memories of the first time you heard the phrase, all will be well, and all will be well, and every kind of thing shall be well. There are different ways of saying that. Some people say it differently. I was maybe 16, and you know how 16-year-old girls are, maybe boys too, I don't know. I was suffering, but I was also longing for God at that age. And I had a creative writing teacher who really got it. And she knew the mystics. And she quoted Julian for me, all will be well, and all will be well, and every kind of thing shall be well. And I carried that with me for years and decades before I ever encountered the full text. And when I did and found it, it was so exciting. But it was, so that phrase was embedded in this text, is in many places. And there was a context for it that I learned that taught me a lot about Christianity, about the essence of Christianity. I learned more from Julian than I have from reading, and I have many times, the New Testament. But I didn't know where she took it from there. And that's what I want to share with you. So this is the second to last chapter, which is less than a page. I marveled at this vision, for in spite of our blindness here on earth and the foolish ways we live our lives, our endlessly gracious God still holds us in the highest regard and rejoices in all we do and are. We please Him most by wisely and truly believing in His love and rejoicing with Him and in Him. Just as we shall one day come to live in the endless bliss of God, praising Him and thanking Him with all our hearts, so He has loved us and known us in His boundless foresight since before time began. He created us inside this love without beginning, and He protects us within that same love. He will never allow anything to impede our ultimate joy. And so, when the final judgment comes, and we are all brought up to the heavenly realms, we shall clearly see in God all the secrets that are hidden from us now. Then none of us will be moved in any way to say, Lord, if only things had been different, all would have been well. Instead, we shall all proclaim in one voice, Beloved one, may you be blessed, because it is so. all is well. We see now that everything happened in accordance with your divine will, ordained before the beginning of time. And so when the final judgment comes and we are all brought up to the heavenly realms, we shall clearly see in God all the secrets that are hidden from us now. Then none of us will be moved in any way to say, Lord, if only things had been different, all would have been well. Instead, we shall all proclaim in one voice, Beloved one, may you be blessed, because it is so. All is well. All right, so in a moment, we will do some questions and responses. And to end, I'm going to read you something from my own memoir, Caravan of No Despair, that I think might put some of this stuff about the mystics, Christian mystics, into perspective. It's about a page. Page and a half. The secret medicine. So this is an example of an epiphany that I had while writing that changed my life. This is the potential power of writing practice. There's a secret medicine given only to those who hurt so hard they cannot hope, Rumi promises. The hopers would feel slighted if they knew. My microphone has totally drifted away. There's a secret medicine given only to those who hurt so hard they cannot hope. The hopers would feel slighted if they knew. When Jenny died, all my spiritual practices failed me. I could not meditate, and the very thought of silent sitting infuriated me, as if someone were offering a Band-Aid to slap over a gunshot wound. Rituals were for regular people who were busy navigating the mundane obstacles of everyday life, not for those who have been stripped, shattered, and blessed by tragedy. Reading had always been my refuge. Now, the only thing I could bear to read was literary fiction. I craved beauty, not philosophy. Sacred scriptures were written in a code I could not decipher, and I lacked the energy to try. Self-help books sounded ridiculous, presumptuous, and whenever I picked one up, I would have the urge to throw it across the room. None of the tricks I had developed over decades on the spiritual path were adequate for mending my brokenness. Meanwhile, my career as a translator of the Christian mystics began to flower. Book after book unfolded, each one reflecting some facet of Christian wisdom teachings. Various publishers invited me to write something for their particular house, and the invitations were seductive. I accepted them all, and then had trouble keeping them sorted out. My publishing promiscuity could have gotten me in trouble, except that I was upfront about my non-monogamous proclivities. Speaking and teaching invitations started flowing in, and I found myself in the position of being the contemporary translator of the Spanish mystics in particular, and a leading voice in Christian mysticism in general. This was fine, except I was not Christian. I was a Jewish agnostic, with pagan inclinations, a lifelong devotion to a Hindu guru, Neem Karoli Baba, an established Buddhist meditation practice, currently on hold, and an abiding connection with at least 3 Sufi orders. The one religion missing from my interspiritual youth was Christianity. As Jews, my family had recoiled from Jesus language. Now I caught myself apologizing to my Jewish relatives, minimizing my work among my Eastern-leaning friends, and over-explaining to strangers on airplanes what it is I do for a living. The more successful I became in my field, the more bewildered I grew. How had this happened? I was a wild bird trapped in a gilded cage. Every day I received tasty morsels, fresh water, clean straw, but no one understood me when I cried out, "You've got the wrong bird." They thought I was singing. And yet, with each book I wrote, my heart healed a little. Every one of the masterpieces of mystical literature I translated offered me a dose of the secret medicine. But my preconceived notions of Christianity, coupled with a severe case of dark night of the soul, obscured my ability to recognize what was happening. John of the Cross was teaching me to rest in radical unknowingness. Teresa of Avila was rekindling my yearning for union with the beloved. Francis of Assisi was inspiring me to renew my vow to minister to those on the margins. Hildegard of Bingen was showing me how to praise God's greening energy rippling throughout the natural world. Our Lady of Guadalupe was reconciling indigenous wisdom and Christian theology in my own troubled heart. The Archangel Michael was infusing me with the fearlessness of the spiritual warrior. And I could add, Julian of Norwich was teaching me about God the Mother. Everything I needed to make my way through the landscape of loss, navigating by starlight, subsisting on nettles and honey, was hidden inside the body of work I was busy trying to escape. One day I will graduate from these Christians, I consoled myself. I will speak in my own voice, which is what I am doing now, and which, I see at last, I could not possibly have done without the Christian wisdom figures who lit my path and kept me safe and cradled my broken heart with boundless generosity and tenderness. It is through his friends, both living and long dead, that I have come to know and love Christ. Lucky for me, the Prince of Peace has never demanded that I swear sole allegiance to him. He seems to venerate my interspiritual heart and bless my bridge-building hands. This makes me love him all the more. Thank you.